Imagine you're deep in the desert. The sun is blazing. The landscape is all sand and rock. You stumble upon an old, forgotten mine, a place where people toiled thousands of years ago. Inside, on a dusty stone wall, you see strange markings. They're not the usual hieroglyphs of the pharaohs. There's something different, something simpler. This isn't just a story, this really happened. In a remote Egyptian mine, researchers found an inscription that has sparked a huge debate. It's a message that some people think could be one of the most important ever found. It might just be a direct link to one of history's most famous stories. So, what's all the fuss about? This little piece of ancient writing could rewrite a small part of what we know about the past. It's like finding a single puzzle piece that makes you look at the whole picture differently. The message is short, carved into the rock by someone who lived a very, very long time ago. But its potential meaning is massive. It connects to tales of slavery, freedom, and faith that have echoed through the centuries. It's a whisper from the past that has grown into a loud, exciting, and sometimes contentious conversation among historians, archaeologists, and scholars all over the world. This discovery takes us on a real-life treasure hunt. But the treasure isn't gold or jewels. It's knowledge. It's a clue that could help us understand where some of the most enduring stories came from. We're talking about a time when great empires rose and fell, when gods were worshipped in grand temples, and when ordinary people tried to make their mark. This inscription is one of those marks. It's a tiny voice from a world we can usually only read about in history books, and it's asking us to listen very, very closely to what it has to say. The journey to understand these markings is a story in itself. It involves brilliant minds, cutting-edge technology, and a lot of patient detective work. It's about looking at faint scratches on a rock and trying to hear the voice of the person who made them. To understand why this ancient message is such a big deal, we need to revisit a story many of us know well, the story of Moses and the Book of Exodus. This is a cornerstone tale in Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. It tells of the Israelites who were enslaved in Egypt. Their leader, Moses, was born an Israelite but raised in the Pharaoh's own palace. He eventually leads his people out of bondage through the desert and toward a promised land. It's an epic story of struggle, faith, and liberation that has inspired people for thousands of years and shaped cultures across the globe. Now, here's the thing about the Exodus story. While it's a powerful and important narrative, historians have long been on the hunt for solid physical proof. They've searched for archaeological evidence that directly confirms the events described in the Bible. Did millions of Israelites really live in Egypt? Did they truly wander the Sinai desert for 40 years? Finding concrete, undeniable proof from that exact time period has been incredibly difficult. This is what archaeologists call the lack of evidence problem. It doesn't mean it didn't happen, just that finding traces of a nomadic group from over 3,000 years ago is super, super tough. This is where our mysterious inscription comes in. If this message, found in an Egyptian mine in the Sinai Peninsula, really does mention Moses or his family, it would be a game changer. It would be a piece of physical evidence from the right place and potentially the right time. It wouldn't prove the entire Exodus story, of course. One inscription can't do that. But it would provide a tangible link, a real-world anchor for a story that, for many, has existed only in the realm of faith and scripture. It would be like finding a signature from a long-lost ancestor. So the stakes are pretty high. For believers, this could be a powerful affirmation of their sacred texts. For historians, it would be a phenomenal clue, suggesting that the stories in the Book of Exodus might have roots in the real experiences of real Semitic people living in Egypt. So, what does this mysterious message actually say? The inscription is written in a very early form of alphabetic script, known as Proto-Sinaitic. It's a precursor to the Phoenician alphabet, which in turn is the ancestor of most modern alphabets, including the one you're reading now. One scholar, Dr. Douglas Petrovich, has put forward a truly electrifying translation. After years of study, he argues that the inscription, when translated from this ancient script, reads, "I am the son of Moses and I..." The rest of the message is unfortunately eroded and unclear, lost to the sands of time. But those first few words are enough to stop you in your tracks. The implications of this translation are, frankly, huge. If Petrovich is correct, this would be the first ever extra-biblical reference to Moses found in an ancient text from that era. It would place a person claiming to be a descendant of Moses right there, in a turquoise mine in the Sinai desert, around the time the Exodus might have taken place. It's an astonishing claim. The inscription isn't just a name, it's a declaration of lineage, connecting a worker in a remote mine directly to one of the most significant figures in religious history. It's personal, it's direct, and it's found right where you might expect to find it. Of course, a translation this big is bound to be controversial, and we'll get into that. But let's just sit with the idea for a moment. Imagine being a worker in that mine, someone who wasn't part of the powerful Egyptian elite. You don't write in their complicated hieroglyphs. You use a simpler script, one that's easier for common people to learn and use. And with that script, you carve a message about your identity, about your family. You are linking yourself to a leader, Moses, who might have represented hope and freedom for your people. It paints a vivid picture of life and identity in ancient times. This inscription, known as Sinai 375a, is therefore more than just a name. It's a potential voice from a group of people who are often silent in the grand Egyptian records. The pharaohs wrote about their victories, their gods, and their glory, but the stories of the foreign workers, the miners, the laborers, those are much harder to find. The story of this inscription begins long before its recent translation. The site itself, Serabit el-Khadim, is a wild and remote plateau in the southwest Sinai Peninsula. It's not an easy place to get to, even today. For centuries, it was the site of major turquoise mining operations run by the ancient Egyptians, dating back to the Middle Kingdom. In 1905, the famous British archaeologists Sir Flinders and Hilda Petrie were exploring the area. They were documenting the ruins of a grand temple dedicated to the Egyptian goddess Hathor, the Lady of Turquoise, when they noticed something odd: carvings that were clearly not Egyptian hieroglyphs. These strange markings were the first examples of what would later be called Proto-Sinaitic script. The Petries realized they had found something incredibly important, a very early alphabetic script. They understood that this could be a missing link between Egyptian hieroglyphs and the Semitic alphabets that followed. For decades, scholars studied these inscriptions, slowly piecing together the meaning of the letters. The site became famous among linguists and archaeologists as the birthplace of the alphabet, a place where workers adapted Egyptian symbols to write their own Semitic language. Fast forward to the modern era. With new technology, researchers could study the inscriptions like never before. High-resolution photographs and digital imaging techniques allowed scholars to see the faint carvings in greater detail. This is where Dr. Douglas Petrovich enters the picture. He spent years meticulously examining all the known Proto-Sinaitic inscriptions from Egypt. He compared the symbols, tracked their development, and built a case for a specific timeline and a complete alphabet, which he then used for his translations. The specific inscription, Sinai 375a, was found on a small rock slab, not in the main temple area, but in the sprawling mining complex. This location is key. It wasn't an official monument commissioned by a pharaoh. It was more like ancient graffiti, a personal statement made by someone who was likely a worker at the site. The slab itself is unassuming, which is perhaps why it took so long for its potential significance to be fully debated. It was just one of dozens of inscriptions scattered across the rocky landscape, a silent testament to the multicultural world of this ancient industrial site. To understand the inscription, we have to picture what life was like at Serabit el-Khadim. This wasn't a city, it was a remote, gritty industrial outpost. The primary reason for its existence was turquoise, a vibrant blue-green stone highly prized by the Egyptians for jewelry and decorative arts. Expeditions to the mines were organized by the state, and honestly, they were tough. They involved long treks through the harsh desert, and the mining itself was difficult and dangerous work. The workforce was a mix of people: Egyptian officials, soldiers, priests, and crucially, a large number of foreign laborers. Many of these foreign workers were Semitic-speaking people from the Levant, the region we now know as the Middle East. Egyptian records call them Asiatics. Some may have been prisoners of war, some slaves, and others may have been skilled laborers who came to Egypt seeking work. This created a fascinating cultural melting pot right in the middle of the desert. You had Egyptians worshipping their goddess Hathor in a formal temple, while right alongside them, Semitic workers were likely practicing their own beliefs and speaking their own languages. It was a place of both cooperation and clear social hierarchy. This is the context in which the Proto-Sinaitic alphabet was born. Imagine you're a Semitic foreman who needs to keep records or leave instructions. Egyptian hieroglyphs are incredibly complex, with hundreds of symbols that take years to master. So you innovate. You take a few simple Egyptian symbols, but instead of using them to represent whole words or ideas, you use them to represent sounds. the first sound of the word the symbol depicts. For example, the hieroglyph for water in Semitic becomes the letter M. This brilliant invention made writing accessible to ordinary people. It was a revolution in communication. The other writings found at Serabit el-Khadim support this picture. We find official hieroglyphic stelae celebrating successful mining expeditions set up by Egyptian officials in the name of the pharaoh. And then we find these rougher Proto-Sinaitic carvings. Some of them are simple prayers or dedications. One famous inscription, Sinai 112, is a dedication to Baalat, the lady, who was likely the Canaanite equivalent of Hathor. This shows the workers were adapting their religious practices to their new environment, blending their own traditions with Egyptian ones. It was a dynamic, multicultural, and multilingual world. As you can imagine, a claim as big as "I am the son of Moses" was not going to go unchallenged. The academic world lit up with debate as soon as Dr. Petrovich published his findings. On one side, you have supporters who are thrilled by the possibility. They argue that Petrovich's meticulous work on the Proto-Sinaitic alphabet is a major breakthrough. They point to the location, the timing, and the context as a perfect fit for the biblical narrative. For them, this inscription is powerful corroborating evidence, a voice from the past that aligns with the stories passed down through generations. These supporters often emphasize the logic of the discovery. For instance, Rabbi Pinchas Winston, a scholar who has written about the find, noted the significance of the location, saying, "It's in the right place, at the right time, and in the right language." The argument is that if the Exodus story is true, this is exactly the kind of evidence we might hope to find. Not a giant monument, but a personal, humble message from the people involved. They see it as a confirmation that the stories in the Bible are rooted in real history and the experiences of real people who lived and worked in pharaonic Egypt. So, the stakes are pretty high. For believers, this could be a powerful affirmation of their sacred texts. For historians, it would be a phenomenal clue, suggesting that the stories in the book of Exodus might have roots in the real experiences of real Semitic people living in Egypt. However, the skepticism from the wider academic community is strong and comes from several directions. Many leading epigraphers, experts in ancient writing, disagree with Petrovich's identification of some of the letters. Deciphering these ancient, often crudely carved texts is not an exact science. Different scholars can look at the same faint scratch on a rock and interpret it as a different letter. Critics like Alan Millard, a renowned professor of Hebrew and ancient Semitic languages, have expressed caution, suggesting that other translations of the phrase are possible and that Petrovich's reading is too convenient. The other major point of contention is the dating. While Petrovich dates the inscription to the 15th century BCE, which aligns with the traditional biblical timeline for the Exodus, other scholars place the Proto-Sinaitic inscriptions in a different period. The dating of ancient uninscribed objects is notoriously tricky and often relies on surrounding pottery or archaeological layers, which can be debated. Skeptics argue that Petrovich has made the evidence fit his preconceived theory about the Exodus. They call for more independent verification and are wary of making such a monumental claim based on a single ambiguous inscription. The debate is a classic example of how history is written, with evidence, interpretation, and a healthy dose of argument. The story of Moses doesn't begin in a vacuum. According to the Bible, it's preceded by the story of Joseph, the Israelite who was sold into slavery by his brothers, rose to become a powerful vizier in Egypt, and brought his family to live there during a great famine. This story sets the stage for the Israelites' presence in Egypt. Interestingly, Petrovich's research connects not just to Moses, but to Joseph and other biblical figures as well. He argues that he has found their names in other Egyptian texts and inscriptions from the Middle Kingdom period. He proposes that a high-ranking official from this era who oversaw the building of a palace at Avaris, the biblical land of Goshen, could be the biblical Joseph. This is a bold claim, linking a specific archaeological site and historical records to the biblical narrative. In his view, the Semitic people who later worked in the Sinai mines were the descendants of Joseph's family, who had settled in Egypt generations earlier. This creates a continuous historical thread, from the arrival of the Israelites under Joseph to their eventual enslavement and the emergence of Moses as their leader. This broader context is important for understanding the world of the Serabit el-Khadim miners. If Petrovich's theory is correct, these weren't just random foreign workers. They were part of a specific community with a long history in Egypt. They would have had their own stories, traditions, and a strong sense of collective identity. The invention of the alphabet, in this view, wasn't just a practical tool, it was an act of cultural preservation. It allowed them to write down their own stories in their own language, separate from the dominant Egyptian culture that surrounded them. Of course, this connection to Joseph is just as debated as the Moses inscription. Mainstream Egyptologists have not widely accepted these identifications. They argue that the names are common and the connections are speculative. However, it shows how a single discovery can lead to a much larger re-examination of history. It encourages researchers to look for connections they might have missed before. Whether or not you believe the specific claims, the theory pushes us to think about the deep historical ties between Egypt and the peoples of the Levant, a relationship that was complex, long-lasting, and shaped the ancient world in profound ways. The controversy surrounding the Son of Moses inscription reminds us of a fundamental truth about studying the ancient world. We are almost always working with incomplete information. History is not a perfect, pristine book. It's a shattered mosaic, and we only have a handful of the pieces. Archaeologists and historians are detectives, trying to reconstruct a whole picture from a few tantalizing clues. An inscription like this one is a major clue, but its meaning is not always clear. It requires interpretation, and interpretation is always a human process, shaped by knowledge, belief, and perspective. The excitement around this discovery is easy to understand. It speaks to our deep human desire to connect with the past, to find tangible proof for the stories that have shaped our world. For people of faith, it offers a potential bridge between scripture and science. For historians, it's a puzzle that could unlock new understandings of language, culture, and society in the ancient Near East. The possibility that we could be reading the words of someone who knew Moses is undeniably thrilling. It makes the past feel immediate and personal. At the same time, the caution urged by many scholars is just as important. History demands rigorous standards of evidence. Extraordinary claims require extraordinary proof, and a single, debated translation of a short inscription is not enough to rewrite the history books on its own. The scholarly process of peer review, debate, and skepticism is not meant to dismiss new ideas, but to test them. It ensures that our understanding of the past is built on the most solid foundation possible. This careful, methodical approach is what separates historical inquiry from wishful thinking. Ultimately, the story of the Serabit el-Khadim inscription is a perfect example of history in action. It shows us that our understanding of the past is not static. It is constantly evolving as new discoveries are made and new interpretations are proposed. Whether this message was truly carved by the Son of Moses or not, its discovery has sparked curiosity, fueled debate, and encouraged us all to look more closely at the faint whispers left behind by those who came before us. And that encouragement to keep looking, to keep questioning, and to keep exploring is perhaps the greatest treasure of all.